The first warning wasn't thunder. It was the taste of iron on Rosencade's tongue. She had learned storms by flavor. Years of walking the flats with her father's driving wagons had taught her that. Dust had a chalky bitterness. Summer rain tasted clay-sweet. And lightning was iron and aspirin, the promise of hurt. It collected now at the back of her throat as the rope scratched her wrists, as the rough trunk of the cottonwood pressed hard against her spine, as her belly, taut and wildly alive, fluttered beneath the thin calico dress that had stopped being her size 3 weeks ago and yet was still all she had. "Still yourself," Elder Tulloch said. His hat brim poured rain like a gutter, and the righteous light in his eyes looked stranger for being lit by the storm. Any woman who tempts law and heaven must be bound to witness truth. Truth, Rosen thought, tasted nothing like iron. Truth had breadth and breath, quiet and room. This, right now, this was something else. This was fear dressed up like a sermon. Deputy Bram Sloan stood a step behind, Tulloch with a rifle across his chest and his coat collar up. He looked anywhere, except at Rosen. Behind him, Marta Ketty, who ran the boarding house and gossiped like it was her tithe, held a lantern inside her shawl to keep the flame alive, wind clawing at the light with cold fingers. A half-dozen others ringed the cottonwood, faces she knew from the market road and the well, faces she'd offered bread to when their coin ran thin, faces that now wouldn't look at the belly that trembled under her breath. "Elder," Marta ventured, voice pitched high to be heard over the wind. The lightning is providence," Tulloch snapped. "It will light her sin plane," Rosen set her jaw. The calico clung to her like wet paper. Her hair, soaked loose from its plait, stuck to her cheeks. She focused on small things, the ache behind her knees where the rope crossed, the way the cottonwood's bark flaked into her palm when she squeezed, the steady rocking tide of the baby inside her, rolling when thunder rolled, quieting when she breathed calmer. "You could have turned me away," she said, the words steady despite the chattering of her teeth. "You could have said the boarding house was full, and that would have been the end." Marta flinched. "I did turn you away." "You told the street why," Rosen returned. "You told it loud." Marta looked at her shoes. "People ask," she murmured. "People have a right to know." "People have a right to water in a storm," Rosen said softly, remembering the pump she had reached for, the hands that had pulled her back, the voices that had shepherded her, not to shelter, but to the lone cottonwood outside low candles. North fence, where the prairie ran out like a wet tablecloth and the sky had already started to knit itself with light. "You were warned," Tulloch intoned, drawing himself up. He was not a tall man, but his voice made scaffolding around him. "A woman who brings her shame to town brings danger with it. Lightning finds high things and wrong things. We'll see what you are." Rosen swallowed the iron. "How will? You know, by whether the Lord spares you." It would have been funny if the wind hadn't been so cold and the rope so tight. Deputy Sloan shifted his weight. He had gray eyes and a farm boy's ears, too big for the hard face he tried to. "Where?" "Elder," he said. "The storm's crossing fast." "She could be hurt." "She should be humbled," Tulloch corrected. "And we should be obedient. Untie her at dawn, if dawn finds us with a mind to mercy." "And if dawn finds her still breathing?" Rosen asked. "Then perhaps you will have learned something," Tulloch replied, and turned. He did not make the sign of the cross. He did not draw a circle in the air. He simply walked away into the rain like a man who believed weather was his to command. The others followed. Even Marta, clutching the lantern in her shawl. Even Deputy Sloan with his rifle, now held like a burden instead of a badge. They left her to the tree and the iron and the sky. The rope dug grooves as she shifted, her weight, searching for some angle that would not grind bone against bark. Her breath ghosted. The wind grabbed at it. The rain came in veils and then in sheets. Lightning stitched the western horizon 1-2. 3 stitches, each stitch followed by thunder rolling like barrels down a stair. Rosen mostly breathed. She did that because she could not run and because crying would waste salt she might need later. She did it because somewhere beneath the ache and the nausea and the sharp little stab that sometimes caught her low as a hook somewhere beneath, all that was the patient sea sound of her baby's life. The hush-hush rush of it, the reason she had walked out of Copper Finch and across 2 counties to a town with a name that sounded like a candle you could carry in your pocket. Low candle, she set into the bark when the thunders pause. Allowed the shape of a word. The name felt foolish now, like believing syrup cures fever. But she said it again anyway, because names were a kind of prayer. We're going to stand this. Hear me? The baby answered in a soft roll that she felt under her hand like a fish turning in deep water. Yes, that roll said. Yes, yes. Keep breathing. Keep making small prayers. She thought of the way the midwife in Copper Finch had put it. Her fingers cool and sure when she took Rosen's wrist the night. Rosen realized that morning sickness did not belong only to mornings. You have your mother's pulse, the midwife had said, and then, because she was a woman who did not waste truth, she had added, you also have her stubborn. Use one to tend the other. So Rosen did. She breathed in 4 beats and out. 8 beats to make the world longer. She pressed her tongue to the roof of her mouth to stop it clacking with her teeth. She counted lightning stitches. 1, 2, 3, she whispered, and the sky obliged. Her lips lifted. An ember of a smile in a wet night. Something moved on the flats. A dark shoulder against a darker horizon. She stilled. In a storm, shapes told lies. A bush became a bear. A wagon became a wall. But this shape did something neither bush nor wagon did. It stopped, listening, the way a living thing listens. The wind pushed rain sideways in strings. The shape blurred and held. Keep going, she breathed, to it or to herself. Keep going, keep going. The shape did not keep going. It came on at a measured pace, not hurried and not showy. And the way it moved made some old part of her, some part that remembered her father checking axle pins by feel and telling horses soft jokes relaxed by a finger's width. Men who rushed in storms left pieces of themselves on the ground. Men who came on like this, with a stride that took the land's measure and then set their own, came intending to leave hold. She could not see his face until he drew near the fence line and stopped with one hand on the top rail, the other lifting his hat by a thumb and forefinger so the rain could run from the brim. Lightning daubed pale paint across his features for a heartbeat. High cheekbones, a nose that had been broken and mended without a doctor, eyebrows slashed straight and low. The hat was oilskin, the coat was oilskin, the smell that arrived before. His voice was smoke and pine pitch, as if he had kept his fire from the rain by sleeping above it. She did not speak first. He did not either. The storm did, booming at them both like a preacher who liked the sound of his own echo. When the thunder let go, he said, "Who tied you?" His voice was low enough to live between ribs. It was not the low of deceit or of velvet lies. It was the gravel low of a man who had swallowed dust and sand and kept more of it than he'd spit out. It carried careful. He had trimmed it, she thought absurdly, the way a good muleteer trims his tack to make it last. "You're not from here," she said, because his vowels were plains wide and not bound by any town. "No," he said. His eyes were on the knot. "Who tied you?" Men who say the Lord and mean themselves. That earned a glance. Lightning strobed. His eyes were pale, but not light, more like the color of river water after a thaw, the kind that carries silt and memory. He moved toward her with his hands open and out, as if she were the spooked one and not the storm. "If I cut you loose," he said, "we're going to need to walk before the ground turns to paste and tries to web your boots." "I don't have boots," she said. "I have these." She lifted one foot and showed him the frayed hem of a once good shoe that had split at the side, so the leather gaped like a mouth. He lowered his hands until his fingers touched the rope. He didn't cut immediately. He tested. He put weight here, weight there, the way you do with a bridge you don't trust. They meant to keep you, he said, and there was no surprise. In it, they meant it to hold till dawn. Or until lightning made a point for them, another glance, not longer but heavier. He slipped a small knife from somewhere that wasn't a pocket he wanted the world to know about, and again. He didn't flinch straight to cutting. He pressed the flat of the blade to the rope and slid it as if the rope might tell him a story. "You're shaking," he said. "The tree is shaking," she said. "I'm keeping it company." That brought a brief sound out of him, not a laugh, but a breath that had humor in it. It softened something in his posture that had been all guard. "Tell me your name." "Rosen." She said it as she'd always said it, the Welsh way her mother's mother had kept alive. The length of ocean and prairies between Wales and here. Our H like a whispered F, rose in with the last syllable falling like a petal. The wind stole half of it. He frowned, leaning in. "Say it again." She did. He nodded once like a man agreeing to terms. "Rosen," he repeated, careful on the sound. "Mine's Calder, Calder. Water that moves by falling." A name that did not mind storms. He shifted to the knot that bound her wrists and began to work with his blade, small moves that used his wrist, not his shoulder. He did not rush. The wind boomed. The tree bowed. Rosen fixed her eyes on the line of his jaw and the way the rain drew little silver threads at his throat when it slid inside the coat and found warmer skin. When the first loop gave, she hissed as feeling rushed the places the rope had been. Calder did not say sorry. He did not say a thing. He moved to the second knot and then the third. He had almost cut them when a lightning bolt landed far too near, so close that her teeth hurt. The cottonwood took that strike and answered, with a crack like a gun aimed at the sky. Rosen flinched hard enough to spasm her belly. The spasm climbed up and over and then repeated. Harder, meaner. Calder's head snapped toward her face. "That one you felt?" "Yes." The word came flat. She swallowed iron again. "And that one? How far apart?" "How long have we been talking?" He looked up at the sky as if it were a clock. 2 minutes, maybe 3. Then 2 minutes, maybe 3. She tried for rye. It landed as raw. Her body had its own math. Her body had been doing it all night while she had been doing the arithmetic of courage. He cut the last knot and gathered the rope from around her, easing it away from the swell of her belly with both hands as if unwrapping something that might break into light. When the rope fell, her knees betrayed her, and he was there, one hand under her elbow, the other braced against the tree behind her so he didn't jerk her forward. "Can you stand?" "I think I already am," she said, aware that her answer made no sense and not caring. She could not feel her hands. Her legs felt like pins on which a dress had been half-hung. The contraction eased and then didn't, just lapped backward like a wave refusing to leave the shore. She gripped his coat to stop herself drifting. He shrugged out of it one-armed, a motion so practiced it told its own past, and flung it around. The oilskin was heavy and still warm from his body. The lining smelled like a fire had dried it yesterday after a different rain. He drew it close and then, without looking away, reached for the hem and pulled it down, not around her shoulders, not first around her back, but around her belly, so the coat's heavy skirt cupped the curve where the baby had just now gone. Still, protection, not modesty, not decency. Protection. The world blew wider. She could breathe deeper under it. She almost wept with relief at the animal kindness of the act. Calder set one hand low at her spine. It was not a claim. It was not an order. It was a brace that told her what a brace was meant to tell. Here's a line. Keep to it. I'll hold. Storm's going to push east in 10 minutes, he said. There's a break in the fence where we can cross without getting our feet too far in the soup. There's a wash 100 yards out. The ground will be higher there. And if we get that far and you're still having contractions, there's a sod house at the lip of the wash with a dry roof. You know a lot for a man who isn't from here." His mouth turned in the ghost of a smile that didn't reach the eyes. Storms rhyme. Fences too. And people who tie women to trees, they rhyme worst of all. She would have asked what rhyme he was hearing. Thunder swallowed the question. He did not drag her. He did not do what men who have decided that their rescuers sometimes do. He did not make her wake the proof of his strength. He matched. That was the only word for it. He adjusted his stride every few steps without changing his posture. So his dignity did not depend on leaving her behind. When she stumbled with a sudden pinch, he stopped. When the wind took them both sideways, he reached not for her wrist or her neck, but the middle of the coat where it gathered over her belly. Pressing his palm there like you press a stove lid to keep it from rattling itself off. "Breathe," he said once when she forgot. "I am." Then breathe better. That earned a ragged laugh from her, the first clean one in a day. "Bossy." "Practical," he said. They reached the fence. It was 3 strands of barbed wire doing their best to be a boundary. The second strand had come loose from its post and made a mouth. Calder bent the top wire up with his shoulder and held it so she could duck without scraping. He spoke not to her, but to the baby. "Easy there," he said, his voice lowering in a way that made something ache in Rosen's throat. "We'll get you under." The contraction that met them at the mouth of the fence was not as close as the others, but it did not care about fences or timing or the dignity of names. She bit her lip until she tasted blood. The storm threw a fistful of hail for spite. She saw Calder look toward the sky and then toward the ground. The way a gambler looks toward a deck in a pot and decides which has more teeth. He shifted, still, holding the wire back, and with his other hand tugged the coat lower, pulling it snug under her belly. He made of himself a wall that the hail had to climb. "Good," he said. "Walk." So she did, and despite the mouth and the wire and the hail and the mud slick as tallow, they crossed without cutting or falling. Across the fence, the prairie opened and changed its mind. The storm had carved a clean seam in the clouds. A star or 2 dared show past the ragged edge. The smell that came then was fresh dirt and crushed sage, the promise end of a fight. "Tell me," he said as they angled toward the wash, "what they called what they did to you." "They called it discipline," she said. "They called it protection, the towns." "And what did you call it?" "I didn't get to name it." The wind lifted her hair with gentle hands now, like a mother smoothing a fevered forehead. "I named other things. The road. My staying. The fact that I ate the last of my bread yesterday and didn't steal more." He grunted, not in disapproval, just in comprehension. "How far along?" 8 months and a week, she said. "Give or take a lie. What kind?" "The kind you tell yourself when counting is too much like waiting." They reached the lip of the wash. It was shallower than he'd promised, a good sign. Floods made sudden trains of water that choked everything. This was not that. It was a patient ditch that the storm had only bothered to dust. Calder dropped into it first, testing for slick places with his boot sole, then turned and was not below her but beside her, lower than she was only so his hand could be higher if she needed it. Rosen hated that she needed it. She took it anyway. His fingers were calloused and dry despite the rain. The grip was ordinary and perfect, like the grip you use when you and someone else lift a heavy chest together, and you know that if either of you lets go, your foot will pay. The sod house he had promised stood where the wash bent like an elbow. It was not much a roof of timbers and dirt, 2 walls that were more intention than defense, a doorframe holding its shape by habit. But there was a dark inside and a promise of dry. "Wait," Calder said, and stepped ahead of her through the low door. She heard his boots thump dirt. She heard the steady scrape of him testing the floor. Then, "Come." The sod house smelled like old smoke and mice and the story that had been told to the last page and then put away. Rosen went straight to her knees on the rough plank set low at the wall and pressed her forehead to the cool wood. The contraction that found her there carried not iron but heat. She rode it with the coat wrapped around her, with her breath pulled long like taffy, with her teeth buried in the meat of her thumb until the thing passed through her like a storm through a stand of wheat, rattling everything and then moving on. Calder crouched, not touching her, his hand a quiet on the bench near her shoulder. "I need to see if you're bleeding. I can tell you that without looking. Tell me anyway, I'm not." She let her breath flatten back to something like normal, just my body arguing with me. He stood. Wood creaked. The storm moved away in increments like a wagon that didn't want to go, but had finally decided to. Rosen opened her eyes in the dim and saw a box in the corner with a lid and a hole chewed in one side. Calder flipped the lid and made a sound that might have been either pleased or annoyed. "What?" "Dry kindling," he said. "Tin lamp with oil that smells like it survived because the mouse couldn't lift it." He struck a match on his boot heel, and the small, ordinary flare was so beautiful she almost cried. He did not hold it high, like a magic show. He only set it to the lamp and coaxed a round yellowish light, then kept it low so it wouldn't read them to any eyes outside. "Drink." He had pulled a canteen from his coat like a miracle a peddler would keep hidden until he knew he had a buyer. The metal was cold. The first swallow hurt in the best way. The second steadied her stomach. He watched her throat, not with hunger, not with a man's claim, but with the practical attention of a person keeping count. More. She drank more. He took the canteen back only when she pushed it toward him with a gesture that said her mouth wanted more, but her belly would punish that choice. He tipped his head back and took a swallow of his own, and then capped it with his teeth in a way that said his hands had done other work, while his mouth did that before. "Who is your midwife?" he asked. "In Copper Finch, there's a woman named Mayra who knows everything except how not to curse at stubborn men." "I meant here. I'm not staying here," Rosen said. The words surprised her ears by sounding so sure. "I was passing. I thought the storm would let me past." "It didn't, no." She pulled the coat tighter around her belly. "But it gave me you." He did not take that as tribute. He reached for a folded square of coarse linen from the dry box and set it next to her hand. "For your mouth," he said. "You bit it. I know. And for the next time." "I know that too." They sat with the small round light between them and the sound of the wash leaning against the outer wall. The storm had pulled back into grumbling. The air in the Calder crouched, not touching her, his hand a quiet on the bench near her shoulder. "I need to see if you're bleeding. I can tell you that without looking. Tell me anyway, I'm not." She let her breath flatten back to something like normal, just my body arguing with me. He stood. Wood creaked. The storm moved away in increments like a wagon that didn't want to go, but had finally decided to. Rosen opened her eyes in the dim and saw a box in the corner with a lid and a hole chewed in one side. Calder flipped the lid and made a sound that might have been either pleased or annoyed. "What?" "Dry kindling," he said. "Tin lamp with oil that smells like it survived because the mouse couldn't lift it." He struck a match on his boot heel, and the small, ordinary flare was so beautiful she almost cried. He did not hold it high, like a magic show. He only set it to the lamp and coaxed a round yellowish light, then kept it low so it wouldn't read them to any eyes outside. "Drink." He had pulled a canteen from his coat like a miracle a peddler would keep hidden until he knew he had a buyer. The metal was cold. The first swallow hurt in the best way. The second steadied her stomach. He watched her throat, not with hunger, not with a man's claim, but with the practical attention of a person keeping count. More. She drank more. He took the canteen back only when she pushed it toward him with a gesture that said her mouth wanted More, but her belly would punish that choice. He tipped his head back and took a swallow of his own, and then capped it with his teeth in a way that said his hands had done other work, while his mouth did that before. "Who is your midwife?" he asked. "In Copper Finch, there's a woman named Mayra who knows everything except how not to curse at stubborn men." "I meant here. I'm not staying here," Rosen said. The words surprised her ears by sounding so sure. "I was passing. I thought the storm would let me past." "It didn't, no." She pulled the coat tighter around her belly. "But it gave me you." He did not take that as tribute. He reached for a folded square of coarse linen from the dry box and set it next to her hand. "For your mouth," he said. "You bit it. I know. And for the next time." "I know that too." They sat with the small round light between them and the sound of the wash leaning against the outer wall. The storm had pulled back into grumbling. The air in the sod house felt like the inside of a bread oven after the bread has taken out heat. With no malice left. "You didn't ask me where I came from," she said. "I heard it," he said. "In the way you almost used your tongue like a blade and then didn't." "How does a man hear that?" "By having someone teach him to stop speaking long enough to listen." He looked down at his hands as if the answer lived there. Lightning flickered, far now, only painting the edge of the doorframe. Also by getting things wrong, earlier in life, and deciding to spend the later parts getting them a little less wrong. She liked that. It made room for the kind of tired she felt, the kind that lived in the bones rather than the muscles, and did not believe in sleep as cure. A crack sounded outside. Not thunder, not hail. The sharp report of wood that had learned to be quiet. Being made to talk. Calder stood, the motion fluid and contained, and blew the lamp before the smoke knew what was asked of it. Darkness ripened. The storm kept its distance like a polite neighbor. Rosen felt every inch of the sod house's walls with her skin then, one with a door, one with a mouse hole, one with a knot of old nails, one that tilted a little as if it had something to say about the weather, bootsteps, not careful ones, not the practical tread of a man who has lived outdoors long enough to stop picking fights with it. This was the stomp of owned ground, the kind that assumes houses salute. Calder's hand found her shoulder in the dark. He pressed once. "Stay low." The door's frame lit in the matrix of lightning before the sound. In that white flash she saw 3 silhouettes where there should have been empty rain. Deputy Sloan at the front with his rifle two-handed. Marta Ketty behind him with the lantern she still nursed like it was a baby. And a taller third whose hatline and shoulders wrote. Tulloch even without his voice. "Open," Tulloch called. "And come into the light." Calder did not answer and did not move toward the door. He lowered himself until he was level with Rosen's ear and whispered without breath. "They followed our prince. Your contractions are going to tighten. If fear climbs you, push it down. Can fear be told to sit?" She whispered back. "It can be given a job," he said. "Let it count." The lantern glow thickened as Marta lifted it and cupped the glass with her shawl again. "Rosen." She sounded not triumphant and not even righteous. She sounded like a woman whose soup had boiled over the night before and who had not yet mopped the stove. "Rosen, are you hurt?" "Not yet," Rosen said. "But I will be if you bring thunder inside." Tulloch's voice came gentled by. "Performance. Child, come out. We'll take you back. We'll pray for your child's soul." Calder's hand tightened on her shoulder only once, not pain. He breathed one word into her hair. Choice. "I have prayer enough," Rosine said. "I need water and a bed and for you to keep your rope to yourselves." Deputy Sloan shuffled. "Elder, be still," Tulloch said. "There is a man in there." He had not missed the coatfulness of the prince. He had not missed the fact of rescue, that someone had seen his theology and cut the ropes that held the sermon in place. "Sir," he called, changing audiences. Without changing tone. "This is town business. You don't belong." Calder lifted his head so his voice would carry without giving its shape to the light. There are 2 heartbeats in here that do. Yours will leave or it will learn to bow. Is that a threat? Tulloch asked. It's a weather report, Calder said. The storm's almost done, but it has at least 1 bolt left. Rosen. Fist. Then the world moved. The last of the storm's light forked the sky and stitched the doorframe white, and when darkness rushed back in behind it, the sod house felt smaller and nearer to the earth, like a lung that had given all it had and needed to rest. Rosen kept the coat clamped around her belly with both hands and felt Calder's breath at her temple, steady as a metronome set to human courage. Outside, Elder Tulloch's lantern scraped the dark with its small circle. Deputy Sloan shifted his boots, the sound carrying like a confession. Marta Ketty hauled the lamp higher against the wave of wind, her knuckles pale even through the shawl. And there stood the man who had said Calder's name like it held a debt that hadn't been paid. Calder, he said again, softer now that he had the attention he wanted. You're late. Calder didn't move from his crouch. You found me anyway, Pike. Pike. The name worked in the mouth like iron, like the taste that had told her thunder was coming. Rosen didn't know the man, but the way the word lay in Calder's voice said he did, the heavy way an old bruise remembers where the fist fell. You're meddling. Tulloch cut in, annoyed to find theology sharing the stage. This is town business. The woman comes out. The woman stays, Calder said, and in that 3-word answer, Rosen heard rock and river, something that wouldn't be moved by being told. Pike's teeth showed briefly, not in a smile but in something that suggested the idea of one. You took a contract and walked away. That's not the kind of story the men who hire me like to hear. You weren't hired to put hands on her, Calder replied, the knife's edge a sliver of cold held low and still. You weren't hired to make a coat of rope. I was hired, Pike said, to clean a town so it stops scaring off investment, to pry out anything that looks like trouble and set it on a road that leads elsewhere. I don't care where. The elder here, his head tipped toward Tulloch without looking, has his way of doing that. I have mine. Yours, Calder, seems to be getting in the middle and muddying both. Rosen felt the contraction coming like weather, not a wave. This time so much as a hand closing around the low of her spine. She breathed and made her fear count the lantern flickers on the doorframe. 1, 2, 3. When her breath could be words, she said through the dark, I am not trouble. I am breathing. That's all. That's enough, Tulloch said mildly, and the mildness was worse than his thunder had been. Breathing carries ideas with it. Ideas like mine and no, and I'll go as I please. Those are good ideas. Marta murmured, and then flinched as if she had surprised herself. Mrs. Ketty. Tulloch warned, the lantern's light making his eyes twin coins. We cannot be seen to reward sin. Rosen swallowed the urge to spit every word she had saved all day like pennies. She breathed instead and pressed her palm under the coat, where the baby had tucked quiet. To the small life there, she said silently, not yet. Not now, count with me. She felt a brave little heel answer. Once, twice. Sloan coughed as if he had swallowed a burr. Elder, this isn't fitting. The storm didn't kill her, Tulloch returned. Which means Providence left room for civic order. Pike made a sound in his throat that might have been laughter's shadow. Providence does love a committee. His boots crunched once on the wash's gritty lip. Calder, step out. Calder's hand left Rosen's shoulder. The absence of it was a cold she felt in her throat. He rose without unfolding fully. A long, controlled motion that kept his head below the window gap. If I do, he said, you don't lay a finger on her. I'm not here for her, Pike said. I'm here for you. Tell your reason to wear a name, Rosen said. Into the door's dark. She surprised herself. She surprised Calder, too. She felt it in the pause he made, before he set the knife flat against his thigh. I won't be quiet while men play chess and pretend I'm a pawn. Silence, and in it the Wash's soft talk against the dirt wall. Like a man clearing his throat politely before saying something important. Darrow Pike, he said finally. You can call me that. Men who don't tend to run out of breath, and I like folk who breathe. Darrow Pike, Rosen repeated, tasting each sound. I am Rosen Cade. I will walk when I choose. I will not go back to your rope. It wasn't my rope, Pike said, and for the first time sounded faintly bored. I subcontract righteousness to specialists. Something in Rosen's chest burned as if the lightning had crawled in and found a dry twig. Then find a new specialist. Elder, Pike said as if she had not spoken. This is where you stop. You wanted fear. You got it. Let it do its work and go to bed. You overreach your hand, Tulloch said, but his voice had softened by a hair. Rain made small complaints along the sod roof. The lantern smoke turned the doorway into a shallow-colored painting of a man who thought God always looked like his shadow. Pike's hat brim tipped toward Sloane. Deputy, you know your ordinance well enough to count. There's no statute about a woman taking shelter during weather. Sloane's ears had gone red above the collar. He kept worrying. No, sir. Not strictly. Strict holds better than righteous in a court, Pike said. Holster that rifle, Sloane did. It didn't sound like a man obeying a lord. It sounded like a man letting his hands be smart before his fear had decided what story to tell. Rosen, Calder said, almost too low for her to hear. It was not a command. It was a thread between them, like the first strand of a rope you are weaving, a thing that promises more behind it. How close? She knew what he meant. She listened, not to the men, not to the lantern or the rain, but to her own country. The soft river of her, the places where rock met water. Another tightening came and went like a visitor with somewhere else to be. It's not cresting. But it's not playing at clouds either. We need cloth, heat, a bed if we can bully one out of this dirt. He lifted his chin toward the dark box again, and she heard him rustling quietly. He found something and brought it. A folded wool blanket, mouse-chewed on one edge. Dry as a saved secret. Marta's voice came small from outside. Does she need a woman? Rosen almost laughed. What I need, she said, is your hands if they're clean, and your truth if it is. Calder didn't waste time deciding if that was scandal. Mrs. Ketty, he said. The name softened the way he had softened the babies. There's a bucket under the eave. There's a spring not 2 minutes east along the wash. Bring water if you can without running. If you can't, bring rags. I can bring both, Marta said immediately, and the light of her lantern bobbed off toward the suggestion of east. That leaves us the Reverend and the deputy, Pike said, amused. And me, leave us the door, Calder said. Go talk someplace your echoes like better. Calder, Pike drawled, are you refusing your arrest polite, or should I count to a number that makes me sad? Sad looks wrong on you. Calder said, try again tomorrow. She bleeds now. You'll spend a week finding your teeth in the mud. All these men will swear the same, and I'll swear loudest. Rosen watched the line of his shoulders in the dark. He didn't widen himself, the way men do when they want to be bigger than a door. He stayed himself sized and let the space do the work. It was the opposite of Tulloch, whose voice had to build scaffolding so he could climb to a height his body couldn't manage. Pike was quiet a beat longer than she would have guessed a man like him could be. Deputy, he said at last, awe. Friendliness gone. Put the elder to bed. Sloane blinked, a boy caught looking at the wrong page. Sir, walk him home, Pike said. Tell him in the morning we'll look very closely at what happens to town reputations when ministers learn to tie knots and call them sacraments. Tulloch bristled, but bristle isn't armor. You presume to. I presume to unclutter a night I need to use, Pike said. Go, before the new puddles know your shoes. Sloane tapped the brim of his hat toward the door instead of toward Tulloch, which told Rosen more than any oath could have. Come on, Elder. I don't take orders from, you take. Orders from the dark, Pike said gently. The dark says go. For a breath, Rosen thought Tulloch would plant his boots and grow roots. Then the storm made a last little whistle through the sod roof, and some small part of him remembered wet boys under trees who had turned to salt and ash because men who loved sermons more than sense told them. God kept count of lightning like tithes. He sniffed, tugged his coat tight, and let Sloane lead him away, his words flinging themselves behind him like scraps of paper that pretended law. Marta's lantern moved farther east and then stopped and turned back and stopped again, as if the water were arguing with the ground about whose job it was to live in the bucket. Pike waited until their footsteps thinned. Then he stepped closer to the door and set his palm on the frame the way a carpenter does when he's checking a piece he's made. You're in a bad shape for friends, Calder, he said conversationally. You've got a woman who thinks words are proper shoes, and a baby whose timing offends weather. Offends men who think they invented it, Calder said. There's a difference. Pike huffed air that had lost the last of its humor. I'll keep my men off your door till dawn. That's generous with what I'm paid to do. You'll pay it back by coming out when the sky is honest and the ground tells me where your feet go. Or you'll pay it back some other way. You know my math. Pike heard the change in her breath. That told Rosen something ugly and useful about his work. You don't like me much now, he said into the dark sod air. You'll like me less in a day. So do your liking while it helps. He tipped. His hat and his shadow slid off the door like a stain going out with water. The night sighed. The wash talked to itself. Somewhere past the fence, the cottonwood groaned, its lightning wounds settling into hurt. Calder relit the lamp with his body. Between the flame and the door, the small round light returned like a promise kept. His face in it was all plains and sums. It didn't look like mercy, and it didn't look like war. It looked like work. He'll be back, Rosen said, using the talk to step over the pain. And come out the other side of it with breath in hand. Morning, Calder said. Maybe earlier if the math he bragged about doesn't add the way he hopes. Either way, dawn buys us time. He laid the blanket in the thick fold on the planks and set another folded square beneath the lower sweep of her back when she lay down. You tell me if the pain sits. If it stays a chair instead of a visitor. She nodded and rolled carefully. Onto her side, the coat still tugged over the curve that contained all the proof left in this world that love could survive a continent of harm. Tell me, he said, and lifted the canteen to her mouth. One swallow, she said. Then I'll hate you for a second. That's fair math. The swallow hit and her stomach protested like a mule asked to argue in the rain. The second swallow did its work under the protest the way a good word does when a bad one is louder. And she didn't hate him. She hated the way the night had. Leaned its shoulder against the door and decided to watch. They were quiet together a minute. Her breath found the trick of making the longer trail. The lamp burned the smell of old tin and new match into the air. The mouse in the box decided he didn't like company and went to find a different ruin to call home. Calder, she said at last, H. His answer lived in his throat because his hands were building a small altar of provisions, the dry cloths he had found. A palmful of salt. A heel of hardtack that looked more like a tool than a food. You knew him. Yes, the word was a coin laid down, not an invitation. Is he the kind of man who keeps bargains? He keeps ledgers, Calder said. The math may look like the same thing from far away. She closed her eyes until the next wave lifted her. Then we plan for him to knock early. We do. His palm pressed a slow circle low and left, and God bless him. He didn't ask if that was permitted. He felt. He learned. That was permission enough. Marta returned with the bucket bumping her knee and a bundle of torn sheets on her arm. I brought everything that could be spared without waking the whole street, she whispered. seeing the low light and standing halfway in and halfway out, like a woman who knows the worth of door frames. Sloane walked the elder home and then went to fetch Dr. Bramall, only he couldn't find him. He's been at his sister's farm with a calf that won't turn. I sent Sloane to bang on Lorna Quayle's door instead. Who's Lorna Quayle? Rosen asked, biting a syllable as the contraction tried to steal it. Midwife and medicine keeper, Marta said. Mean as nettles. Better hands than the doctor when the Lord gets clever with how a baby sits. That sounds like exactly her religion, Rosen said. And Marta's laugh landed like a dry blanket on a wet day. We have until dawn, Calder said. And maybe not that. Mrs. Keddy, can you boil water at your stove and bring it back? In a covered pot? Marta straightened. I can bring 2. Do it, Calder said. And on your way, wake Quayle before the rooster has a chance to be proud about it. Marta's lantern bobbed away again, and her footsteps thinned till Rosen heard only the wash and her own weather. Outside, the sky's torn seam mended itself. One star, then another. Clouds limped east, full of their spent anger. Tell me something that isn't about pain, she said. Such as your hands, she said. They know this work. Who taught them? He was quiet as he wrung a cloth and put it warm along the base of her spine. The heat drew a sound out of her unasked. A woman, he said finally. Mother? No. A pause shaped like a grave you build for memory but don't visit. A woman who took me in when the world had taught me how to make messes, but not how to clean them. What did she teach you first? How to hold a kettle, he said. And then where to set it so it didn't scald the small children, who wanted to love the shine right off it. Rosen smiled into the blanket. Practical. Bossy, he said softly, and she breathed around a laugh that wanted to be bigger than the room. A scrape at the doorframe. Marta again, faster. Then sense said she should have been able to do all that distance. She had not gone to boil water yet. She had detoured back because running makes you drop the extra thing you should have thought of first. Deputy Sloane says Lorna's on her way, she said breathlessly. He found her at the back of her house arguing with a goat. He says she was awake enough to be angry at the sun for not being up to listen. Good, Calder said simply. He didn't thank God. He didn't thank luck. He filed the truth where it would be useful. Water. Water. Marta nodded fiercely and treated the wash as if it were a hall she'd been crossing all her life. Rosen watched her disappear with that bucket and felt something ease in her chest that had nothing to do with breath. You've been alone a long time, Calder said without looking at her. She could have snatched at hurt at the implication. Instead, she let the honesty be a gift. Not anymore. Not tonight, he corrected gently. Morning promises change. Men like Pike keep their mornings sharp. Men like Pike have to live somewhere, she said. So do we. That's the trouble, he said, and kept his hand moving low and slow, as if he could iron the contraction flat before it wrinkled. The next wave came more certain. The one after that came quicker than her counting would have liked. She felt. Her mind did the trick all good minds learn when the body has decided it will not be negotiated with. It stepped back and took notes. Bark roughness, blanket itch. The way the lamp flame trembled when the wind found a seam in the wall. Calder's hand working circles like a man smoothing a field for seed. She rode, she returned. She rode again. Hoofbeats. One horse. No voices. The gait of a creature annoyed at being aimed at other people's business. Lorna Quayle. Marta hissed triumphantly from outside. And 3 pots. The woman who ducked through the door didn't waste posture. She was shaped like a gust of thistle seed and wore a shawl that had already turned 3 men into better listeners this week. She set down a basket that smelled of alcohol and herbs and a stubborn sort of mercy. Name, she said, into the room, making the air bend around the consonant. Rosen Cade, Rosen managed. Month, 8 and a week. Trouble? Men, Rosen said. And a storm. Same thing, different hats. Lorna Quayle turned her head toward Calder without taking her eyes from Rosen's face. You, sit where I tell you. Hands when I want them. Mouth shut unless asked. Yes, ma'am, Calder said, and to Rosen's astonishment and relief, he put his body where Lorna pointed it without asking if dignity would live there comfortably. Lorna's hands were clean and aged and had the blunt truth that comes of knowing how to pull a life from a place that does not want to open. She set one palm on Rosen's belly and listened with her fingers. She didn't close her eyes like men do when they want their hands to pretend to be holy. She kept them open and full of world. You've got good tone, she said. And you've got a baby that hasn't decided if it wants to lead with its head. What does that mean? Calder asked, breaking his own rule at the worst possible time. It means the child might be breech, Lorna said, and moved her right hand lower with the calm of a woman counting laundry. Might also mean it's just thinking like its mother. And checking the door for fools. Rosen breathed and felt her stomach take the shape of the midwife's palm. If it's breech, then you listen sharper and you do not push like a mule at a gate, Lorna said. You let me work. Her eyes flicked toward Calder. And you brace your back and remember that a woman doing this is not a fire to run from, nor a sermon to talk over. She is doing math with the world, and your sums are not needed. Yes, Calder said again, and Rosen found that word a better prayer than any she had heard from Tolake's mouth. The pots Marta had set on her stove boiled and came back slopping and steaming with a speed that made Rosen believe the street had decided to help. Marta set them on the dirt floor and threw cloths over them to keep the heat. Sloane appeared once in the doorway, hat in his hands, and left again before Lorna could turn him into a chair. Work found them. That was the only way to say it. Work that had nothing to do with men's bargains or Pike's ledgers. Work shaped like breath and heat in Lorna's short, precise words. Work like Calder's quiet hand, a brace and a wall. And a question asked and answered without a sound. Work like Marta's feet, learning how not to trip over the wheel ruts in the wash even when she ran. The tightening changed. It lost its visitor shape and dragged a stool into the room and sat down. Lorna's mouth went thin, not fear, focus. We are beginning. Rosen took that like a command. She set her jaw where it made a good shelf to hold determination and looked past the door toward the piece of sky that Pike had promised them. Dawn was a rumor there. Not light yet. A pail that might grow up to be one. Listen, Lorna said. Your body knows. If it tells you to push, you don't. Not until I say. If it says hold, you obey. If it says scream, you sing instead. Low. Men think God hears high sounds. He doesn't. He hears ground. She put her ear to Rosen's belly and smiled the feral smile of a woman who has outlived 3 husbands and every one of their bad ideas. The child listens too. Good, good. The next contraction tried to wrench her spine out by its own roots. Rosen sang. Not words, not anything that would live on paper. A sound like a rail laid long over dirt. A sound like bread torn with hungry hands and shared anyway. Calder's hand caught the back of her neck and held it just so. His other palm walked slow circles down the path, Lorna marked. Better, Lorna said. Again. They made a small hard world together, the lamp, the pot, the damp cloth cooling and warming in turns. The braid of Rosen's hair coming loose and being plaited again by Marta's surprisingly gentle fingers. The mouse deciding to forgive them and sitting in his hole to watch with glittering eyes, as if to memorize how newness is made. Between the waves, Rosen's mind went listening where it still could. It heard Pike's absence like a tooth you keep tunning after it's pulled. It heard Tulloch's house somewhere far off, full of self-love and stale prayers. It heard Sloane breathing as he walked the street, the rhythm that meant a boy trying to be a man and not certain yet which lessons to keep. It heard the cottonwood speak the language of cracked wood. Rosen. Calder said once when the world was quiet enough to contain a syllable that belonged to more than pain. Yes? You are not alone. I know that, she said. I'm the one who asked for hands. He huffed a small breath that felt like a laugh that had decided to sit down because there was work still to do before it could stand. Time gathered, time spilled. The lamp burned lower. Lorna's basket birthed. More cloth and stern language. Marta's shawl turned damp at the edges, and she didn't notice because her hands had learned a better thing to mind. Now, Lorna said at last, and the word lived in the room like a bell. Now we test the door. Her fingers were warm and uncompromising. She closed her eyes then, not in prayer, but in reference, like a woman reading a map she had drawn so often she could see it just as sharp in her head. H&H, what? Calder said, because his one mouth wasn't a sea you could calm with orders. Child is thinking of coming feet first, Lorna said evenly. Not a bad child. Just not a reader of signs yet. Rosen's heart kicked. The way a colt kicks fences. Can we turn it? We can try, Lorna said. And we can do a breach if it won't be taught. But if we do it my way. No man puts his hand where mine is. No one tells me what my hands know. Her eyes flickered toward Calder and softened the way a knife softens when it meets bread. You do what I ask without prettying it up. Calder nodded once, a soldier receiving a good order at last. Rosen, Lorna said, and put her palm on Rosen's cheek, matter-of-fact mercy. This is possible. It is work. It is not an omen. It is not a story men get to tell after and make themselves taller with. It is you doing a hard thing well. Rosen's throat went hot. Yes, good. We dance the child. Lorna's hands moved lower. When I say, you breathe deep as a well and then blow out like you are a bellows and the coals will die if you don't. Rosen nodded. Calder's hand found her palm. She crushed his fingers until she felt bone. He let her. He adjusted how. He held so that if she slid, he would be the floor for one more inch. Outside, the sky shifted a shade up toward day. It didn't hurry. It didn't apologize for how long night had been. It was a truth, not a gift. Rosen loved it. Now, Lorna said again. Breathe, blow. Let me turn what thinks it knows better. Rosen did. The pain was a door opened the wrong way on purpose. It scraped, it shouted, it gave. She felt Lorna's hands a midwife's argument with the dark that the dark agreed to lose. She felt Calder's palm at her spine, the way he made himself a plank and a dock and a sentence that did not end with a question. She felt Marta's fingers on her temple, steady as a clock. She felt the child move. Oh, God, she felt it change. It's mind. Good, Lorna hissed through her teeth. Good, you stubborn, clever thing. The relief was not relief. It was breath before the next proof. Again, Lorna commanded. Before it thinks. Rosen obeyed, making the bellows of herself. She willed every hurt to be a helping. She aimed her sound low, as Lorna had ordered, because ground listens first. And something shifted with that obedience, something beyond muscle and beyond bone. It felt like a story choosing a different ending while the words were still in the throat. There was no time to bless that miracle with language. Water broke with a rush that soaked cloth and dirt and pride. The next contraction rose up with a farmer's stubborn and a storm's memory. Now you push, Lorna said, the words sharp enough to nail truth in place. But only when I say. They fell into a new math. Pain, breath, push, stop. Breath. Breath, the hot iron scrape of the world getting larger. Lorna's voice, Calder's hand. Marta's low, unself-conscious hum-some hymn, misremembered and better for it. The doorframe took a shadow. Not Pike's slouch. Not Tulloch's stiffness. Sloane, hat in hands again, chest heaving from a run he hadn't practiced. He's back, he gasped, as if the word could be made small enough not to break anything important when it fell into the room. Calder didn't look away from Rosen. Who? Pike, Sloane said. And men I don't know. Not town men. Not farmers. Of course he is, Calder murmured, as if the words were a sum that had finally balanced. Lorna did not look up. If a man wants to make himself important during a birth, hand him a broom and tell him to sweep the rain out. He'll find he is too busy to ruin anything that matters. Sloane blinked. Yes, ma'am. And shut the door, Lorna added. Without heat. If the men outside want to be born again, they can stand in the weather and do their own work. Sloane shut it. The lamp guttered and then held. Rosen, Calder said softly, and there was something in his voice she had not heard from him. Fear, yes, but braided so thoroughly with reverence that it made a strength of it. I need you to make a louder truth than whatever is on the other side of that wood. She would have made a joke because jokes were hammer and nail both, but the contraction had other ideas. She bore down when Lorna told her and blew out when Lorna snapped and then did it again. The room's edges fell away until there was only the work and the small, growing space the work made. Outside, a voice she didn't know said something like a price. Pike answered with arithmetic that did not sound like coin. Men's boots adjusted on dirt. The wash laughed at all of them because it had been there when none of their names had been born yet. Head, Lorna said, and the single word lit the dark of Rosen's mind with a joy so clean it made her bite her lip to stop from spending it too quickly. Good, good. Hush now, hush. Wait. Her hands worked a small miracle, slow and sure. There. Now you push like the doros you rent. Rosen did. The world opened. And then Lorna's face went still in a way Rosen did not like at all. Not panic, not fear. The stillness of a hunter who has seen the deer change direction and knows the next step has to be exact, or the forest will keep the animal forever. What? Calder heard it too. His hand at Rosen's spine became iron. With a heart, Lorna didn't waste gentle. Cord, she said. Round the neck, not tight, but round. We have work to do before the next wave takes its wages. Rosen's mind tried to stand on panic's floor and found it slick. She dug her nails into the coat where it lay around her belly like a promise and made herself look at Lorna. Tell me. We slip it, Lorna said. We slip it fast and clean. The child wants the world. We give it a path. She set her fingers. When I say Calder, you press here, not too hard, not soft. I will know if you lie to me about either. Yes, Calder said, and Rosen heard the tremor he thought his mouth had hidden. Rosen, Lorna said, making her name into a tool that fit exactly the job at hand. You do not push until I say. You breathe like a wind that moves wheat but does not break it. Rosen nodded. The next contraction rose up hungry, and she caged it with breath and a sound so low it felt like it came from the dirt itself. Outside, a fist banged once on the doorframe. Calder, Pike called, almost merry. Your dawn came early. Lorna's hands moved. Calder pressed. Rosen held the whole world between her teeth. The lamp flame leaned and stayed. The wash laughed and didn't. The mouse went silent, perhaps, whispering a small rodent prayer. Now, Lorna said, and the word was the key in the right lock. At last. Rosen pushed. A cry split the air, high and outraged and perfect. Rosen didn't know she was crying until she tasted salt. Calder made a sound that was not a laugh and not a sob and would embarrass him later if anyone tried to name it. Lorna's hands were already working, brisk and tender, clearing the small mouth, rubbing the small back. Girl, she announced, in the tone of a clerk entering a fact in a book that will be read in court. Stubborn and with an opinion about weather. She wrapped the little body and set it in the crook of Rosen's arm as if the space had been designed this way at the beginning of the world. The baby's skin smelled like iron and bread, and something Rosen would have called light if light had a scent. The cry softened into small, indignant breaths. The weight of her was terrifying. The weight of her was right. "Hello," Rosen said, and her voice broke like dawn. The fist struck the door again, harder. "Calder," Pike called, impatience. "Sanded just enough to keep it from being a threat you could take to court. You owe me time." Calder didn't look away from the tiny face. "We're busy," he said, and his voice had a color in it Rosen had not expected to live there. Joy that had remembered it owned him before grief did. "Busy works for me," Pike replied. "I like a man who could have run and decided to stay where his debt confined him." The knob turned. The door didn't open. Someone, Sloane or Marta or the wash itself, had put something heavy against it. Lorna nodded once at Calder's hands. "Cut." He did, and Rosen realized sometime between the word cord and the word girl a whole other necessary miracle had happened, and she had not noticed because the one in her arms had filled her with so much consequence there was no room left for fear. "Keep her against you," Lorna said. "Skin, the world is allowed room. Give her your heartbeat to hide in." Rosen pulled the coat aside and fit the warm, damp bundle against the larger warmth of her own body. The baby sighed. Time sighed with her. "Now you are going to deliver the rest of your work," Lorna said briskly, "because the world has no patience for beginnings that forget to finish." They did. The lamp guttered and raised itself. Marta cried quietly and then laughed because the sound startled her. Sloane's voice outside told Pike something in a tone that sounded almost like a stance. Pike's answer told the door he could be patient one more minute than he had planned. Rosen held the baby and let the work finish itself, and then began the work that would never finish, counting fingers and the perfect absurdity of toes. Memorizing a mouth that already knew how to argue with air. Feeling the tiny shoulder's weight and filing it under the word home. "Name," Lorna said, because paperwork kept the world from sliding off its foundation. Rosen didn't. Reach for the old names she had carried like talismans across counties while she walked. She did not try to resurrect ancestor syllables, as if blood could be bribed to protect her. She looked at the wet, furious face and named the thing she wanted her daughter to inherit. "Flint," she said softly, "because she makes fire without asking permission." Lorna huffed a satisfaction that sounded for once like blessing. "Flint Cade," she pronounced. "Good name. The kind you can chew." The door shuddered against a push. "Calder," Pike called, laughter gone to wire. "The dawn." Calder met Rosen's eyes. There wasn't room in them for all the words they might have tried. There was room for one. "Together," he said. "Together," she answered, and felt in her body the truth of it, not a vow in the air, but a muscle under bone. He reached and tugged the coat's edge up over Flint until the baby was a red-cheeked. Thought pressed against her mother. Lorna stood with her hands on her hips like a general who had just won a war she never doubted. "You can open that door," she said toward it, not waiting for a knock. "But if any man points a gun at a woman who has just done what she has done in this room, I swear I will have him on his back in the wash with his head baptized until his opinions drown." Marta laughed outright. Sloane made a helpless noise that wanted to be a cheer and wasn't sure if it was allowed. Calder moved to the door. He didn't pick up the knife. He didn't widen himself. He put his hand on the frame where Pike's had been and then lifted the latch. The door opened to early light, and a row of men whose hats had been taught to think and whose faces hadn't learned it yet. Pike stood in the middle of them, all ink and ledger and rain on oilskin. He took in the room in a breath. The lamp, the midwife, the woman on the blanket with a baby at her breast, the man who stood with one hand on the doorframe and the other on nothing because it didn't need to hold a weapon to be dangerous. "Congratulations," Pike said, because he knew how to read rooms too. "You have made the world noisier." "Better," Lorna corrected. "Noisier has to be trained. Better arrives already knowing some of the rules." Pike smiled without showing his teeth. "All right," he said to Calder. "Dawn is stingy, and my employer's stingier. Step out. We'll walk to the square and decide how to price your interference." "Price it," Calder said, and didn't move. But you won't take it from her. Pike looked past him at Rosen and at Flint, who sneezed and made a face like a queen hearing a poor argument. I don't collect from newborns, he said. Bad precedent. Too much paperwork. Men like you always find ink for the wrong things, Marta muttered. Pike's eyes flicked to her. He didn't answer. He knew better than to start fights with women whose hands were still wet from other work. Calder, he said, softer again. You're late. Don't make me be. Calder looked one last time at Rosen. He had the look of a man who had been the last thing between a storm and a town, and had decided to stay even though his bones told him to run, and the math said running would be painless. He nodded once. Wait, Rosen said, and the word stopped a roomful of men who believed only bullets could do that. She gathered Flint closer and felt the small breath find her heart. You will not walk him out like spoil. You will not put your hands on him as if he were a door you bought. He will walk beside you, not behind. Pike considered the demand as if it were an entry in his book and not a woman's voice cutting a shape in the morning. Beside, he agreed, and tilted his chin toward the men to make sure they learned new grammar. Calder stepped over the threshold. The light took his face and made of the scars there a map a child could follow to water. Pike fell in a pace to his left, just out of arm's reach, which told Rosen he had learned some lessons from his own mornings. Lorna exhaled and resettled, her shawl like a general folding a flag after the battle. Mrs. Ketty, she said briskly, you will sit by this door with a broom and hit any man who confuses curiosity with rights. Yes, Marta said happily, grabbing a broom as if she had been born for it. Sloane, Lorna added without looking, you will stand where those men can see your badge, and you will behave as if it means something. The deputy swallowed. Yes, ma'am. Rosen looked down at Flint. The child had gone from crying to the serious small work of living. Her mouth found what it needed. Her hands opened and closed with the pointless, perfect hunger of new fingers learning they exist. When she looked up again, Calder and Pike were already halfway to the path that led to the square. The men with Pike wore faces made out of corners. The sky wore a color that promised heat would wake up soon and make the street smells loud. The cottonwood beyond the fence held its hurt like an old man holds rain in the knees that tell him whether to plant or to pray. Rosen's body threw one last echo of pain through her. Not labor now, but the ache that comes when a tendon remembers what it had to do. She breathed and made a small plan and then a larger one over it. Lorna, she said, how long before you leave me to rest? When I am sure the resting will be honest, Lorna said dryly. Why? Because I am going to get off this floor, Rosen said, and wash and bind and dress. And then I am going to take my daughter and walk to the square. He will not stand there alone while men who love ink decide what to write on his life. You will tear, Marta said, horrified and awed both. I have already torn, Rosen said calmly. I have done it correctly. The rest is binding. She looked at the door, at the thin line of light under it, at the shadows of men's boots moving, jealous of the day. He put his coat over my belly in a storm that has the weight of a sacrament and the shape of a vow. I answer vows. She smiled at Flint, who scowled back in her sleep as if the world had already made a suggestion she intended to correct. We answer them. Lorna studied her with the keen eye of a woman who has hunted not animals but excuses out of better people. Whatever she saw there made her nod once as if a ledger had balanced. Fine, she said. We do it smart. We do it slow. We bleed only as much as truth requires. We make the street watch what it decided it wanted to see last night, and then be ashamed for wanting it. Lorna, Sloane said from the doorway, not turning because his badge needed his eyes, and his eyes needed men to know they were watched. What if he tries something clever? Lorna said. Then he will learn what clever feels like from the other end. Rosen shifted Flint higher and felt her own body take inventory and decide what it could carry. The answer was inconvenient and sufficient. The door shuttered once more. "Time," Pike's voice called in without asking permission. "Bring him to me, or I'll fetch him." "Try," Lorna muttered. And Marta raised the broom like a sword blessed by boiling water. Rosen gathered her feet under her and felt the floor admit she had a right to stand on it. She stood. The world tilted, considered dropping her, changed. "It's mine." Flint snuffled, unimpressed at gravity's little joke. "Slow," Lorna said, not soft. "Slow," Rosen agreed. She took one step. Then another. The door waited, thin and wooden, and holding a morning full of men who had decided they got to vote on everything that breathed. She put her hand on the latch. The latch lifted, and the door shoved back in from the other side faster than any of their hands could counter. Pike stood in the frame, his face gone to angles, his hat gone so the rain-licked hair lay like a dark sentence on his forehead. "Change of plan," he said, and for the first time his voice held haste. "Men I don't work for are here to take what we all built and set it on fire. If you want your man breathing in an hour, you'll bring him now. Or," he glanced once, quick and calculating, at the bundle against Rosen's chest, "or you'll make me choose a different debt to collect." Behind him, over his shoulder, Rosen saw them 6 riders with faces like the edges of broken plates, and a 7th, whose smile had no weather in it at all. The doorframe trembled. Flint slept on. Rosen's grip on the coat tightened, until leather bit her knuckles, and Calder 2 paces behind Pike now, ringed by men and math, looked at her with a steadiness that made a promise her body felt in the bones that had learned storms. "Don't," he mouthed. She didn't. Ryder with the weatherless smile lifted a hand, and the men around Pike's men shifted, their boots like wolves testing the wind. The wash, as if it understood its cue, sucked in its breath enough to show the mud under it. Rosen took one breath, and then another, and built a cliff out of both. "Then you will have to take him," she said, and the room felt the drop open. Under every foot that didn't know it was already at the edge. The rider's smile widened, and the gun in his hand rose until it made a line that pointed straight through the door, past Pike's shoulder, past Sloane's badge, and at the place where Calder's heart beat under a shirt that still smelled faintly of smoke and rain. The morning held. And then the shot began to fly. Fly. The bullet wrote its fast, stupid line through the morning, and Rosen felt the air change around the word before her ears finished catching it. Calder moved. She did not see him think first. She saw him as if the world had stepped back a half pace to give motion room. Shoulder twist, hand to frame, weight turned into somebody else's safety. Pike's coat jerked at the tug. The ledger man swore without words as Calder wrenched him sideways and took the space the shot had wanted to use. The round cracked the door's inner plank and spat splinters like angry seed. Sloane flinched and then remembered his badge. Marta's broom came up with the authority of a church bell. "Down," Lorna said, not loud correct. Rosen dropped without thinking, because her legs had not forgotten who had given them orders. All night. Flint stirred, made a sound like a mouse arguing, and kept sleeping because her mother's body had made a wall, and Calder's coat made a roof, and the world had not yet taught the child the grammar of fear. Another shot. Then 2 together. Men outside answering men outside. Not Pike's people against Calder, not yet. Someone else pulling first and second, and wanting to pull thirds until math looked like blood. Rosen pressed Flint tighter and tasted the storm again in the back of her throat iron. Aspirin, the way lightning had taught her what it intended. But this was not sky. This was small men making a big noise. "Names," she said, "because a thing you can name gets smaller." "Crow," Pike said from the door, pushed halfway back into the room by a bullet that caught the jam an inch from his ear. He didn't duck. He canted his head like a man checking a column of figures. Jotham Crow and the men who mistake him for a solution. Why? Rosen didn't ask for a lecture. She asked for a lever. Why tells you where to pry. Because the syndicate likes its streets like it likes its ledgers. Pike replied, "Right even inside the shape of danger. Straight, clean, no penciled corrections from the poor." He glanced at Calder. "They're done renting my broom. Now they want fire. Then they can burn their own house," Lorna snapped, and yanked a pot lid off the kettle Marta had. Brought. Steam rolled up with the smell of boiled iron and soap. "Deputy, if you mean to be a wall where it counts." Sloane shifted, set his shoulder to the door so Pike's men couldn't be pushed back in over them. Pike's mouth twitched like he wanted to tell the boy how to brace his feet, and decided. Discovering was part of the price of keeping a badge. The world outside spoke in hooves and oilskin, and that peculiar silence that hangs about men who have convinced themselves God invented bullets for bookkeeping. "Rosen," Calder said from the hinge, voice even as a shelf. "Stay low. If I go, you do not follow." She hated him soft for that. "If you go," she answered, "I will have a word with the road itself." He almost smiled. Then the door jumped again, and there was no room left for anything in the mouth but what you needed to breathe with. Crow's voice came from outside, pleasant as dry paper. "Pike, you went sentimental." "Not the word," Pike called back. "I went practical. You don't got a town you plan to sell later." "Sell it to whom?" Crow asked, genuinely puzzled. "Once a place learns how to say no, it's like a dog that's tasted chicken. You can't keep it out of the coop." "Maybe you learn to latch your coop," Marta muttered, and raised her broom as if no one had ever told her it wasn't a halberd. Another shot. This one low. It made a new mouth in the dirt at Pike's heel. Crow clucked his tongue like a disappointed schoolmaster. "Let's be simple," he said. "Hand me my late contractor. Hand me the woman who thinks she can make example. We'll forgive Low Candle one sermon in a storm." "You'll forgive yourself a beating," Lorna said. "And you'll take it standing if you want to keep your pride's teeth." "You have interesting midwives," Crow noted. "I have alive babies," Lorna returned, and set her palm with authority on Rosen's back again. "Breathe. You bleed as you must, no more." Rosen breathed. She counted her fear. She counted. Flint's stubborn hiccup of a breath under her chin, and felt the math of the room settle around. Those numbers. Pike edged out into the door's slice of morning. He did not ask permission. He did not show weapon. He put his hands where Crow's men could see them, and leaned a fraction. Not enough to make himself a target, enough to make the geometry of the standoff shift. "You take a step," Crow warned. "And I counted theft." "From whom?" Pike asked. "You, your investors, or the land itself?" "From my patients," Crow said lightly, "and that has a price you can't audit." Rosen heard men lifting barrels. She heard one man spit. She heard a hoarse blow as if the joke bored it. Calder moved. He did it like a man showing a child how to walk on ice. A toe set softly here, a knee unlocked there, a hand finding wood because wood likes to be touched if you do it respectful. He stepped past Pike and into the daylight 2 fingers then. "3, Calder," Rosen said, and put every syllable of his name into the narrow hall between his shoulder blades so it would have his back. He did not look in, but she felt him answer, alive. The word hummed under his skin. The word stayed. Crow smiled wider when he saw the man he had come to price. "There," he said softly, almost fond. "You did what stubborn men always do. You made it my problem to protect you from yourself." Calder didn't speak to him. He spoke sideways to Pike. "You have 6. 7, Pike corrected. "One behind the cottonwood with a barrel long enough to compensate for whatever he's compensating for." 8, Sloane said from behind the door, surprising himself. "One on the bank above the wash. He keeps peeking like he thinks peeking makes him invisible." Crow laughed, pleased at the counting. "Look at Low Candle," he said to his men. "It learned to see." "Low Candle learned to be seen," Rosen said, more to Flint than anyone. "That's a different thing." Crow's gaze cut toward her. Even from where she crouched, Rosen felt it like cold water poured down a spine. He took in the bundle at her breast, the sheen of sweat, the blood that had written truths on the blanket, the midwife's set jaw, the deputy just beginning to believe his badge was a tool and not a prayer, the boarding house keeper wielding a broom as if the house itself had asked to be kept. He did not sneer. He did not laugh. He adjusted the ledger in his head. "Calder," he said again, almost friendly. "Walk." Calder stepped forward one more half pace, then another. Pike shadowed him like debt does, staying just out of reach but always there. Always counting. Rosen felt Flint stir under the coat and angle her mouth in a way that said the world had made a foolish noise and she intended to ignore it. The absurd courage of that small gesture put iron back into Rosen's hands. "Listen," she said low, to Calder's back in the room in the morning and her own fear. "If they take you, that isn't the last word. Words are my business." Pike murmured, and then ruined the jest by turning into the man who needed to make sure the numbers did not move. "Crow," he called, "if we price this wrong, you'll spend the rest of the month mopping a square. My men are idiots, but they're loyal. Your men are loyal, but they're not idiots. They won't like your math if it turns their boots red." "Then don't make me add," Crow replied, and the barrel above the wash shifted with the air of a man who had been corrected about visibility and wasn't fond of it. "Enough," Lorna said, and the word rang. She stood. "Not all the way only." As much as a woman whose hands still smelled of birth needs. To stand for men to stop pretending they're the only grown things in the room. "You may bargain over your man. You may not bargain over my women. The next one of you who points iron at this door will carry his arm home in a sack." "Midwife," Crow said again, head tipped. "You talk too much for a trade that used. To think screaming was holy." "I don't need holy," Lorna said. "I need quiet and blood where it belongs. You can't provide either, so you may go." Crow's mouth went thin in a way that said he wanted to like her and hated that impulse. "Pike," he said, and measured the man beside Calder with a weight of old account. "You can walk away from this and keep your employment. Deliver the one who broke his contract and we'll pretend you didn't grow a conscience." "Conscience is a useful tool," Pike said dryly. "We should rent them out along with shovels." He kept his eyes on the men flanking Crow. He did not need to look at Calder to know what Calder would do. Men who had done work together learned each other's hinge points as surely as a midwife learns where a body will give. Rosen watched the math lay itself out on the dirt. If Calder stayed inside, they would pull him out over their bodies or pull the house down to get at him. If he went outside alone, he would not make it to the square before someone decided a dead lesson is cleaner than a living one. If Pike went with him, Crow would use the moment to sell a morality tale to his own men and then decide later whether to cut Pike loose as an example or keep him as a ledger man who knew how not to embarrass him in public. None of that included Rosen and Flint except as Inkmen felt free to spill for emphasis. She stood. Lorna's hand went to her elbow before the motion finished. Not to stop it, to steady it. "Slow," she warned. "Slow," Rosen agreed, and stepped to the door. The light found her. Men's eyes did not know how to hold what they saw: blood and milk, and a child whose breath was the loudest argument for a better world anyone was ever going to get from a woman they had tied to a tree. "Calder," he said again, not unkind. Like a waiter repeating a menu item for a patron who keeps asking if there is another choice. "Walk." Calder did, 2 paces forward. He could have counted them in his sleep. His body had learned that distance back when he used to carry men out of rooms for other men who paid him to do it. The step where a hand can find a shoulder and steer. The step where a gun can find a back and call it order. He took that step and stopped there, because stopping there says, "You remember your own weight." "Tell them," he said over his shoulder, not to Rosen alone, to the whole square that had learned to look, what the contract was. Crow did not sigh. He was not a man given to broadcasts of his internal weather. Remove obstacles, he said. Make it safe to move money. Shake the dirt out of the corners. He lifted a finger toward Tulloch's porch in a gesture that made a circle of the square without blessing it. Keep men like him tidy. Keep men like you useful. Useful, Calder repeated as if tasting a word to see if it had turned. They hired me with that word. Useful to whom? To the future. Crow said simply, sentiment is expensive. Rosen felt anger laugh inside her. Laughter that had emptied all the sweetness out of itself and left only the bones. Expensive to whom? She called. Crow glanced her way again. To men who know how to keep ledgers. And to women who keep children, she returned. You forgot those ledgers because you don't do that math. Lorna's hand pressed her elbow once. Good. Pike's mouth twitched like he wanted to applaud and remembered which crowd he stood in. You can go, Crow said to Rosen, and his voice was tired now. Take your sermon and your child and go. Rosen shook her head. I don't leave. Men I owe. He put a coat over a belly you would have left as target practice. I owe that. Crow actually smiled then, real and small and human. I respect a woman who pays debts. He looked back at Calder. Walk, Calder did, again one step, then one, and then the square's shape changed. A man in Crow's line misread the motion and lifted his barrel to remind the morning what bullets sound like. Sloane, feet planted now like a creature that had found the ground he was meant to defend, brought his rifle up without thinking and sighted the man's hand, instead of his heart because Lorna's low singing all night had retuned something inside him. Don't, Rosen said into air that had begun to taste of iron again, thought it didn't matter. The man at the cottonwood had the same itch in his finger and less experience saying no to it. He fired. The ball went wide, but not useless. It found the water bucket Marta had set down to shift her grip on the broom and split it. The wash drank and laughed. Then everything moved at once. Pike stepped hard into the man who'd fired and knocked him backward with his shoulder like a ledger being closed. Crow lifted his hand to correct the math, and 3 of his men mistook the gesture for permission and made the wrong sum again. Sloane shot to disarm and caught a wrist clean. The gun flew and the boy in the back cheered because he had just seen a thing worth remembering. Tulloch started to speak and found that he'd forgotten the words for once. Marta swung her broom like a woman who had been waiting for a sacrament that made sense. Rosen stood still in the middle of motion. She did not flinch. She did not drop. Still is not the same as helpless. Still is a choice you make when the world wants to turn and you want it to see what it's spinning past. Calder made a line toward the hitching rail. Not to run, to remove the angle the men with Crow had thought they could use to cow him. He never made it. Jotham Crow did not like chaos. He liked form. He made one with his hand, a flat palm that meant stop written in a language good men learn in crowds. Some of his men read it. One did not. He took 3 steps faster than his sense and found the space between Pike's numbers and Calder's to be just wide enough for stupidity. He lunged at Calder's back with brass knuckles that had solved problems for him before. Calder turned. Rosen did not understand how he found that movement in all the other movements, but a man who has done the wrong kind of work learns to feel gravity when it changes its mind. He let the lunge pass, caught the man's wrist, and used the speed. Crow's fool had brought with him to throw the arm where it wanted to go. The brass kissed dirt. The man's face followed. Teeth counted themselves and found they had lost. Enough, Crow said, and this time the word had a lid on it that jarred the square like a bucket slammed down on a snake. The guns quieted. The horses remembered they were smarter than men. Calder and Pike stood shoulder to shoulder because that was where the math had put them. Rosen breathed because Lorna's hand told her to, and because Flint had decided the world was boring and had gone to sleep again with a sigh like the end of a page. Price, Crow said once more, not because he thought the conversation would end this time, but because he needed The column heading for the figures to line up under. Pike answered the only way the moment allowed. I walk him out of town, he said. I walk you with us to the road that doesn't belong to you. You take your men and you go call your investors something they won't like to their faces. Low Candle keeps its midwife and its deputies. Hands clean and its women in their beds instead of on your rope. And the woman? Crow asked, gesturing with his chin toward Rosen as if he did not trust his hand to be seen in that direction without the world deciding it was a threat. You will not speak about me, Rosen said. Crow's mouth made a small apology it did not have time to feel. And the woman, he corrected, stays. She goes where she likes, Pike said evenly. You are not an usher. And if I say no? Crow asked. Then you make a sound that I can use to keep my men honest when I tell them why I am building a gallows, Pike said. You will not like hearing it in your own voice. For the first time since he had arrived, Crow looked tired enough to show the edges of himself. He had not wanted this fight. He had wanted a neat morning, with a man delivered to him like a ledger on time. He had gotten birth and blood and a town that had remembered how to say no to fire. He lifted his hand again, not a command this time, an acceptance. Walk, he said dourly. But if you leave my sight before I have counted you clear, I will let lightning choose a house and call it justice. Lightning already made a choice, Rosen said softly. It struck the only thing that had roots. Crow did not answer. He did not know how. He turned. His men turned with him. The square, always starved for a parade, made a lane. Calder looked back once. It was not dramatic. It was housekeeping. His eyes put Rosen and Flint in the door of the sod house where they belonged in his mind, so he could find them later, if later still existed. Rosen felt that look like a warm stone set in a pocket where the wind can't find it. Go, she said, and did not know if she was saying it to him or to the morning or to a story that needed its last chapter to come fast. They walked. Pike on Calder's left, Crow 3 paces back and to the right. Men who had mistaken employment for moral authority took their studied steps. Sloane followed with his badge where the sun could write its own sermon on it. Tulloch watched from his porch and thought of words that would make him less small, and found he could not remember any that worked on a day like this. Lorna touched Rosen's arm. We rest 2 minutes, she said. Then we follow like witnesses. Like midwives, Rosen corrected, surprising herself. Same thing, Lorna said. And Rosen loved her for that. They did not get their 2 minutes. At the edge of the square where the street turns toward the east road, where the cotton gin's shadow lies long even at noon, a man stepped out who belonged to none of the rings. He wore a clean shirt and a face like the inside of a filing cabinet. He had a tin star that did not belong to Sloane's paybook and a paper in his hand. Order. He called and held up the paper like a priest holds up a wafer. By authority of the territorial judge in Carson City, by request of the Halberd Syndicate, for the maintenance of peace and the facilitation of commerce, the man called Calder is to be taken into custody and conveyed to the rail junction, Wasp Creek, for immediate hearing. Pike didn't swear. He smiled like a man who has just found a new hole in a roof he was already paying to fix. Of course, he said under his breath. They brought ink to a gunfight. Crow took the paper because he liked wearing official sentences on his face. He scanned it. He did not look surprised. He did not look anything. He handed it back to the man with the borrowed star, the way a banker hands a note he has already bought to the clerk who will collect it. Calder stood still. He did not look at Rosen, because if he did his feet would remember that walking away is not in their design. He looked at Pike. Pike looked at the paper. The paper looked at the town and pretended it was more than it was. What happens if we say no? Rosen asked Lorna without turning her head. We say no, Lorna said briskly. And then we wrap your belly tighter and walk to the east road anyway. Marta stood on the edge of the lane with her broom in her mouth and did sums out loud for anyone too dull to keep up. If it takes 6 men with guns and a man with a pen to argue with a woman who just did 14 hours of work the Lord outsourced, she said, I think the woman's already won. The man with the borrowed star reddened like a stove rim. He held the paper higher. By authority, he began again. By humanity, Rosen said, and stepped forward. You can bring a town to a morning, Rosen returned. And you can let it look. Sloane cleared his throat and found his mouth brave. And you can let a deputy speak in his own county, he said, looking at the borrowed star like a boy who has found a counterfeit coin and is trying to decide whether to throw it away or make a lesson of it. Halbert doesn't own my heir, the paper holder faltered. He had prepared for bullets and for Pike's sarcasm and for Crow's ledgers. He had not prepared for women who spoke accountancy in blood and breath, and for a deputy who had discovered that the badge makes a louder sound when it hits the ground than when it sits quiet on a vest. Pike did one kind thing then. He relieved the man of decision. We go, he said to Crow. The whole road to the boundary, and when the paper tries to move us faster than feet can carry, we make it feel its own weight. You get your show for your investors. We get our look at your judge. Everyone learns. What happens when a town decides its eyes are not for rent? Crow considered the proposition with the weariness of a man watching a simple job hire complexity without asking him first. He nodded finally. Beside, he said to Rosen, echoing the word she had made him accept at the sod house door, not behind. Beside, she agreed. Then walk, Crow said for the last time that morning. And the square began to move. They made a procession Low Candle would tell stories about in years, when the tracks had come and the money had come and the trouble that travels with both had learned the roads by heart. Rosen with Flint against her breast and Lorna at her elbow. Marga with a broom like a flag. Sloane with a badge that had weight now because he had decided it did. Pike with numbers and the memory of nights he had spent doing worse. Calder with his hands empty because he wanted them to stay that way. Crow counting steps because counting is a habit that wears men thin. They reached the East Road and found the cotton that had survived the storm making a pale map of stubbornness along the fields. The wash meandered beside them, laughing in places where men think water shouldn't laugh, and quiet in places where men expect drama. The town followed in a line that looked like a river with too many stones. Tulloch came too. He could not help himself. He loved the sound of his own righteousness, and hated that the morning had found a better choir. He kept to the edge and tried to make his face say shepherd while his hand said rope. Rosen walked. At first every step felt like a dare tossed in God's face. Then her body remembered what it had been built to do: carry, keep, move, and the pain made a room inside itself for purpose. Pike dropped back once to walk beside her. You should be in a bed, he said conversationally, as if discussing the price of oats. I was, she said. It broke when the world turned over. He huffed a laugh that did not make it to his eyes. You are inconvenient, he said, in ways I admire. You are expensive, she said, in ways I might learn to forgive. He shook his head. Don't, he said softly. The world needs accountants more than it needs saints. Then, be one, she said, and moved ahead again because the road had a say, and the road's say was keep going. They were 2 miles east of the square when the wash narrowed, and the road did, too. That is where men who mean mischief put their hands, because they like corners. Rosen felt the hair lift on her arms. She felt Flint sigh into sleep again, as if to make a space for her mother's attention to go where it needed to. Crow lifted his hand. The column slowed. Pike frowned, doing sums with the landscape. Calder stopped because Pike did. The riders stepped out at the bend, 3 of them, then 5, then the quiet certainty of more behind. Not Crow's men. Not men who answered to any star, borrowed or honest. Men with scarves where a badge would go if a badge had ever wanted them. Men with faces that had never done their own accounting. "Look at that," Crow said mildly. "We are popular." Pike's mouth made a shape Rosen suspected was prayerless. "They're not here for a hearing," he said. "They're here to harvest." "From whom?" Sloane whispered, shame and anger making new music in his throat. "From the same field as always," Pike said. "Whoever can't run and doesn't know how to write bad checks." The leader of the Bend men grinned, and his smile had no weather. Rosen recognized it from the sod house door, the man with the weatherless face, grown larger now that he had found his stage. He tipped his hat with the flick of a wrist that said the gesture had been made to women in windows and men in coffins. "Morning," he called. "Which of you is selling the road today?" "No sale," Pike said crisply. "Closed for inventory." "Inventory says a lot about the value of what I take," the man returned. "Which will be money, which will be horses, which will be that man there." He pointed with his gun at Calder, like a child choosing a sweet. "For the syndicate's generosity, and that deputy's star to hang on my wall." His gaze slid to Rosen and did not stay there long, because a woman who carries a newborn like a banner is not the kind of story men like him tell about themselves after. "Names," Rosen said again. "Because names make a lever." Pike obliged without taking his eyes off the Bend. "Mathis K," he said. "Used to ride for a cattle concern that liked to move fences without moving posts. Now he rents himself to whoever thinks mess looks like opportunity. Opportunity looks like a ledger you didn't have to write." Mathis said, "Step back, Pike. You're paid to count." "I'm paid to collect." Crow made a sound low in his throat. "You will not collect on my road," he said. "Not while I'm spending on it." "That's the thing," Mathis drawled. "You stopped spending when you sent for a paper instead of a posse. Paper's slow. I'm fast." Rosen heard the air change the way she had when the first shot flew. She felt the road brace itself. She felt Flint make a small fist in sleep and relax it, and her own hand did the same, as if taking instruction from someone who had only just arrived on this side of the world and already knew some things worth learning. Lorna stepped up on her left, like a cliff grows beside a river. "We're going to find a tree," she said calmly. "We're going to stand with it. If the world brings bullets again, I have a broom and a curse for everyone." "Not a tree," Rosen said, throat tight and steady. "I'm not letting a tree have one more of my mornings." "Then the ditch," Lorna said. "It's good cover, and it's where men expect to see women when men are making idiots of themselves." "Ditch," Rosen agreed. "Marta, I already see it," Marta said, and her broom pointed like a general's baton toward the curve where the wash dipped under the road and came out looking pleased with itself for finding shade. Sloane stepped without asking who he was supposed to be and found the place Lorna had named. He planted his badge on the brink, and his boots where the earth said it would not betray him. "Pike," Crow said quietly, "your math. My math says you and I are allies for 10 minutes, Pike returned. "After that, we can go back to disliking each other." "Agreed," Crow said, and turned his horse half a pace without moving its feet the way only very good riders know how to do. Mathis K lifted his hand. Men behind him lifted their guns. Rosen felt the world take a breath. "Down," Lorna sighed, and then everything became road and sound and choices. Guns barked. Not as many as the fear in Rosen's belly had prepared for, more than the hope in her throat had wanted. Sloane fired the way he had in the square, at hands, at arrogance, at the place where a man's weapon becomes his face. He hit more than he missed because fear had taught him how to aim last night in birth, had taught him where not to. Pike shot twice without looking like he aimed at all, and hit 2 things that would have hurt them. Once a magazine on a man's belt, once a cinch that sent a horse rearing, and the man on it remembering he had bones. Crow did not fire. Crow counted and moved and put himself where the men who liked to point things would have to see him and then feel shame. Later, if they kept pointing, Calder did what men who have seen too much death do when death comes to fetch someone else. He moved the path of a bullet with his shoulder by moving the man who would have caught it with his hand. He stepped into danger not as if he loved it, but as if he recognized it the way a man recognizes an uncle at a funeral, unwelcome and expected. Rosen crouched in the ditch, Flint a hot miracle against her, and watched with a focus so sharp it could have cut rope. The wash laughed as if the world was foolish, and the world agreed. A man broke from the bend and made a line for Rosen, because there are always men who believe an easy cruelty is a smart plan. Marta met him first. Her broom bristled like a field of spears. She smacked his knuckles with the flat of it so hard he dropped his pistol, and then she drove the straw end into his chest and the stick end into his shin, and the man sat down in the road to consider whether God existed, and if so, how he could have made such an embarrassing day. Don't pick something up you don't know how to keep, Marta told him calmly, and planted the broom again like she was sweeping a porch in a neighborhood where fools got tired. Another man scrambled down the bank at the wrong angle and found gravity had less interest in his plans than he thought. Sloane's bullet took his gun before the ground took his pride. Lorna threw a handful of dirt into the eyes of a third who had decided to make a point with the toe of his boot in the direction of a child. He learned a new respect for Earth and its opinions. Mathis swore and grabbed for a second weapon. He did not find it. Crow had seen the motion before men like this man were born. He had his boot on the holster before Mathis's hand got there. Opportunity quivered and then sat down. Enough, Crow said again, and this time enough sounded tired and real. He looked around at the road, at the ditch, at the faces of men who had not expected to be told no by a day. He shook his head once. I'm spending too much. Mathis spat into the dust, angry at the day for deciding to be expensive. You can spend later. I'll collect now. Crow's eyes went cold. You don't collect on my accounts, he said. Not on my road. Not in my morning. And then, because the world likes symbols more than it likes lectures, the cottonwood up the wash groaned like an old man who knows his stories don't save anyone in tour. Half a limb came down slow, like a curtain deciding to fall, and landed across the road with a sound like doors shutting. Silence followed, not peace. The kind you get when a room has been told to think. Mathis K. decided he didn't like thinking. He flung his shoulder into the limb like a boy punishing a toy. It didn't move. He flung his mouth into Crow's face. You got soft, he snarled. You started keeping accounts you don't get paid for. Some accounts, Crow said conversationally, pay later. His hand moved too fast for a ledger man. It moved with the speed of a man who had learned arithmetic with a knife. It found Mathis's collarbone and squeezed until the nerves there remembered they had a job. Mathis dropped his gun without meaning to. Sloane kicked it into the ditch without looking like he meant to. Marta put her broom on it like a flag. Pike, Crow said, not taking his eyes off Mathis. Finish your 10 minutes. Then take your man and get off my books. Pike nodded, not because Crow was his superior, and not because the paper said he had to. Because the math had settled, and there was no profit in arguing with a limb and a morning, and a woman holding a child like a banner. The Bend men looked at each other and discovered a truth that Rosen had learned somewhere between dusk and dawn. You cannot spend fear the way you think you can. It turns into other things in the pocket and buys you consequences you did not want. They drifted back like men who want to claim they had been walking away all along. The road widened again the way a throat widens when a stubborn piece of bread gives up its pride. Calder stood with his hands empty and his breath full. Rosen looked at him and thought, absurdly, of the way he had pressed the hem of the coat under her belly as if that simple neatness could keep the storm out. He had been right, not about storms. About promises. Walk, Crow said. But it wasn't a command anymore. It was resignation and relief and the annoyed affection of a man who still had to send a report, while knowing the story in it would look like a lie to anyone who had not been there to see a midwife threaten to baptize a gunman until his opinions drowned out they walked. Wasp Creek was another 6 miles, but men who had run their mouths found themselves quiet now that the day had taught. Then their letters were not the only kind that mattered. The town came to the boundary stone that said Halbert with more pride than honesty, and stopped there like a river stops where the sea begins, not because it wants to, but because the salt has other rules. Here, Crow said, and pointed to the stone. The paper's road begins. The town's ends. Stones don't decide that, Rosen said. But she stopped because the pain had written a new sentence down her spine, and because Lorna's hand on her arm said, even a stubborn story needs punctuation. Pike turned to the man with the borrowed star. You have your pretense, he said. Don't drop it on your foot. The man nodded, chastened by a day that had made his mouth dry and his hands shake. He made a gesture at 2 men who wore the transport of their trade in their posture, and they moved to either side of Calder like the arms of a kindly chair. Wait, Rosen said, and the road held a second while she walked the last of it. She stood in front of Calder with Flint between them and looked at the man who had covered her belly with his coat and then covered a morning with his refusal to be small. I will walk tomorrow too, she said, voice low. If they keep you. Overnight. If they don't, I will walk anyway because walking is how I pay what I owe. He smiled with his eyes. Don't pay all at once, he said. It makes men who keep ledgers nervous. Good, she said. They should be nervous. He reached not for Flint, not for her cheek where men think cinema belongs, but for the coat. He lifted the hem where it lay across Flint's back and touched it like a vow. Then he let his hand fall. He turned because the road said it was time. Calder, Pike said softly as they took the first steps onto the paper's road. You still owe me, Pike said, for walking late. I know, Calder said. Send me the bill. I just did, Pike said, and tipped his head toward Rosen without moving anything else a man could shoot at. They walked on. The town watched them go until the men in the paper and the law that had borrowed a star made the horizon look like a ledger's line. Rosen stood with Lorna and Marta and Sloane, and the rest of the town that had discovered it owned its eyes. She felt the ache roll through her like thunder leaving a promise to come back some other day, some other night, to test the roof again. She kissed Flint's head and found it dry now and warm and heavy with sleep. Home, Lorna said, and did not mean house. Yes, Rosen said, and meant the same. They turned back toward Low Candle. The cottonwood creaked as if to nod. The wash laughed as if it had written the whole morning down somewhere. Water keeps its stories. They had gone 20 paces when the sound came over the flat, like a bad idea that has decided to try once more. Not gunfire. Not hooves. The scream of a steam whistle taken up too early in the season. From the east, from Wasp Creek's direction. Rosen stopped. The town stopped with her because that is what towns do when the woman who has just made tomorrow's population says, "Here, what is it?" Sloane asked, already putting his badge between his fingers like a man who knows it will not help and intends to hold it anyway. "It's the papers train," Pike said softly, eyes narrowed against distance. "They brought it ahead of schedule." "Why?" Marta asked. "To make everything move faster than sense," Lorna said grimly. "To make a hearing a sprint." Rosen felt the ground under her feet the way you listen to a sleeping child loving it because it's yours, hating that anything might wake it rough. The whistle hooted again, closer. She could not see the engine yet, but she could feel the idea of it arrive. Iron. Speed. Men who like watching things run. "Sloane," she said, steady as a measured pour. "Get the wagon." "Marta, fetch the tightest shawl you own." "Lorna." She looked at the midwife and did not ask. She only nodded, and Lorna nodded back. "What are you doing?" Pike asked, knowing the answer and needing to hear it anyway, the way men need to watch a match catch flame even when they trust the tinder. "Paying a debt," Rosen said. "And writing a line the paper can't rub out." The whistle screamed. Again, near enough now to make the cottonwood shudder. Rosen tightened her grip on Flint and began to walk east once more, just as a rider tore back from the boundary at a dead run. Dust boiling from his horse's chest, he hauled up hard. Enough to make the animal plant all 4 feet and slide. "From the junction," he shouted, voice breaking on its own urgency. "They're putting him on the train now, no hearing, no judge." His words tangled with the whistle and with the sound of something heavy coupling to something that didn't want to move. Rosen's body remembered the ditch and the tree and the night, remembered lightning and rope and the hand that had put a coat over her belly. It put all of that into her legs. She did not run. She did something harder. She handed Flint to Lorna, with a look that made more promise than law does. She stepped into the road, and as the next whistle tore the morning, she began to walk into the east with a pace that told men with paper and men with guns and men with clean shirts that a woman who has learned to make a world say yes will not learn to say no when the world asks her permission to steal. Half the town stepped with her. The whistle shrieked again, closer, too close. And over the sound, faint but sure, a gun cracked from the direction of the junction. Pike's head jerked. "That's a signal," he said, and started to run. Rosen did not run. She did not have to. The road learned her speed and decided to keep up. Ahead, where the tracks cut the field, where men with ink had given iron the right to complain, where a steam engine huffed like a new god learning to speak, something happened that made Crow's men lift their faces and forget to pretend they liked math more than miracles. The coupling pin flew. A shout carried. The engine lurched. And Calder stepped off a moving train. He landed wrong and rolled and rose with his breath like a saw. Halberd men grabbed. Pike's men reached. Crow's math tried to catch up with the new number written in the dirt. Rosen felt the world contract to the size of a man's next step and the color of a baby's last sigh. "Calder," she said, though her mouth did not make sound anymore. He turned toward the road. The train screamed. A shot cracked again, and a figure she could not name, yet because the distance still owed her an introduction, lifted a rifle above his head and shouted something that made Crow swear and Pike laugh, and the borrowed star hit the ground with a sound that said paper sometimes remembers it was once tree. Calder ran. Men lifted guns. Rosen lifted her chin. The morning broke like bread.